Welcome back to Power and Market. I am your host today, Tho Bishop. This is not a normal show. You might notice we are not joined by Ryan McMakin, executive editor of Mises.org. He is on assignment. So we are joined today by Mr. Connor O'Keefe, who has our usual Wednesday morning article, and Joshua Mawhorter, who's got our usual Friday article, along with being part of our editorial team. And the purpose of Power and Market is to talk about some important events of the day, but this episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about last week's Supporters Summit down in beautiful Delray, Florida. We had a lot of attention placed on that. We could obviously talk about the government shutdown, but, you know, every day that doesn't have the government in full operation is a good thing. We've hit that on issues past. We could talk about a few of the other news items out there, but our focus has been on the Supporters Summit, and so we're just going to talk a little bit about that event, about what makes it special to work at the Mises Institute, the great people that we are very privileged to have the support of. And so it's going to be a little bit guys talking about what the Mises Institute means to us for this particular episode. Send us an email if you are a listener to Power and Market. We want to get some feedback from you as well. It was very good to see so many of our donors who were big fans. Big Connor O'Keefe fan club building. Always good to see. So we'll open up there. How did you guys enjoy Delray?
It was excellent. I love Supporters Summit. It's a fun event. Of course, we tend to go to nice locations. And this was a beautiful resort we were at in Delray. But overall, I just find it very invigorating, I guess, like to interact with our donors face to face. And our donors they're just so especially when you kind of dip into the more political world and parts of the libertarian world. There's a lot of weirdos out there, a lot of people that are,
I think every libertarian knows what you mean, Connor. Everyone has that lived experience.
We've all had that lived experience, but I'm just always kind of blown away by the intelligence of the people that show up at these events. And I think also one thing I love about this organization is, unlike a lot of think tanks out there, where they're essentially being bankrolled by like one billionaire or a foreign government. That is not the case for us. We have a lot of donors, a lot of different donors, and rather than this kind of like snobby person that's using us to sort of push policy that's beneficial to them that we're sort of serving, we just have these smart, interested people that are just as passionate about all these ideas as we are, and are allowing us to do what we do. And it's nice to have an event where we can be face to face with them, and hopefully give them a good time in a beautiful spot.
How about you, Josh? What was your takeaway from Delray?
Yeah, it was a great time. Nice to meet a lot of the donors and see people from work. Working remotely, don't always get to see coworkers every day, but just get together. And I had never been to the Supporters Summit before, so it was a great time. I found the lectures to be great. Each one that came up, which each one was uniquely sponsored by one of the supporters or the donors. I was like wanting to research into it, read about it, think more about it. And then each next one came up. I was like, well, now I want to move on to this and talk about it. So it was great content, but it was nice to meet some of the people, talk to them. And as Connor said, really just is a unique thing, because I found it kind of hard to, as I've worked at the Mises Institute for a little over a year, to describe sometimes what it is I do. Like, I sometimes use the term, think tank, but I'm like, well, not quite. But really, it's a research institute. It's a research center that's dedicated to Austrian economics and libertarian political economy and these things. And so it doesn't, as Connor said, fall into just being funded by, the donors set the agenda for what the Institute is. They're just genuinely supporting Austrian economics, sound money, peace, and getting the state out of people's lives. And so it's fun to talk to those people, and they have they come from all different types of backgrounds, and everyone was just really nice, really welcoming. They wanted to talk to you, talk about what you did there, and it's their support really that I'm thankful for. It just makes my job possible to be living the dream working at the Mises Institute. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. My only complaint was my wife wasn't able to come on this trip, so it was but I was like, this would have been a nice one to bring her to. So maybe next year.
Well, my one complaint is I don't think Murray would have been a big fan of Delray, because all the bars closed at like 11 o'clock. Like the latest opening bar was like the hotel bar, which I did put good use to, but like that closed at midnight. And so it's like, if Rothbard was here, like where's he gonna get his 3 a.m. martini couldn't even find like a good diner. So I don't think Rothbard would approve of Delray, but it was a beautiful city, walkable city. We even got out in the intercoastal waterway for a little bit, which is great. And one of the things I like about the Supporters Summit is, and this is why I go some of the content that we had there, which will be coming up on our various media channels, so you too can see if you were not privileged enough to be there. But the great thing about the Supporters Summit is that we have some of our big names, right? You get your Guido Holzman coming in from Angers, which is not always the easiest thing to do. You get your I always loved Alex Pollock. I'm gonna brag about him here in a second as well. But you get our who's who list, and they have a lot of flexibility in what they talk about. Like this theme for this one was economic liberty. You can go a lot of different directions for it. People went a lot of different directions for that. But it's different than like a Mises U lecture. Right, where there's certain sort of checks in a curriculum you're trying to check. Different than some of our our research conferences. You're presenting papers. You got a few keynote events, but most of presenting like a new research thing can often be very almost narrow in what you're presenting there. Though also a great time. Obviously, when we had like our Human Action Conference or our War Revisionism Conference, there's a very prescribed sort of topic there that everyone's working in. But it's always kind of interesting to see how our biggest names, our shining lights, kind of the angles that they take with the what kind of within a broader theme, what they think is important in today's day and age. Really enjoyed Patrick Newman had a great talk about strategy for like Rothbardian strategy. How do we actually create more economic liberty that we were talking about there. My favorite talk, I alluded to a little bit earlier, was Alex Pollock on Hayek and money. And the point he made at the end, which was an obvious point, like, I don't want to pretend that, some profound insight, and I don't think Alex took it as such either. But, his big focus was on gold, crypto, the breaking away from government monopolies on currencies and the like, the way that's reflected in prices currently today. If you're a gold holder, you're doing quite well. But the extent to which the increased demand for gold amongst international banks, how like the banks themselves, how they're operating is demonstrating, gold as that sort of international money by their own behaviors there. Which again, I think it's an obvious insight, but I think it's a great one, obviously a very important one that you're not going to get at many other events outside of the Austrian orbit. But Alex, he presents as what like an economist should be. Like he's got great insight. He's always very he speaks with a certain sort of gentlemanly. He's a fun, gentlemanly sort of persona there. So always a big fan of Alex Pollock. Connor, I know you are working the camera and making sure that our content was getting to our viewers later. So I know you did not get to really dive into a lot of the content there. But Josh, who are some of the highlights for you out of our star-studded schedule?
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Pollock was one of the earlier talks, and he was actually newer to me. Like I didn't know until I saw him in the Mises Fed documentary, and then last year's Supporters Summit, watching it online. So his talk about just money and currency competition, and really just the simple insight at the end of not having to say it has to be gold, not having to say it has to be cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or silver or anything, but just saying allow market competition and people would abandon the state system of money that's monopolized right now, and allow currency competition and let the market choose what to use as money. So that was very good. And Dr. Pollock's very nice, very personable. I emailed him last year for a few quotes that he had given in his talk last year. And between he and I, he was able to email me, say, okay, I gathered it from this book. I was able to find the footnote somewhere online. And so that was kind of fun to have some of that back and forth. So that one was good. But I was just kind of even reviewing the list. Dr. Rittenauer talked about freedom as a tonic for social conflict. So, rather than right now, there's a lot of, even if the word isn't used, this focus on kind of this class consciousness Marxist idea that all the differences between people are something that is necessarily political and what divides them. And he talks about, that it's actually freedom and interaction peacefully that lessens conflict. There are a few others. I always enjoy Dr. Terrell's on land management, or even things that people think are kind of innocuous or kind of outside of the, we know that markets work for these things, but really, we can't have national parks and public land be handled by the free market. And so why I was encouraged by that is it's what differentiates the Mises Institute and Austrian economics and at least this type of Rothbardian libertarianism is not we're okay with the free market up to this degree, and then maybe the conservative Republicans go a little further, they're okay with it up to this degree, but then there's all this other stuff that's that wouldn't work for. And so they come along with examples and economic theory and history and current events to say, no, the free market absolutely does work in these cases, and here's why, and here's how state interventions worsen the situation. So I always like that type of talk, because it, I don't want to say makes it okay to be a libertarian, but just encourages you that you're not crazy outside, just thinking some radical thing that's so ridiculous, but actually something that the free market works in these cases as well.
And there's one example he brought up where there was a fire on the West Coast, where you could see two, there was a government land management and government park on one side, and the other one was a large park that was managed by a non-government entity. And how you could just tell afterwards, from looking down at the devastation afterwards, you can very clearly identify which one. It's kind of like the equivalent of the internet access in Korea map. You can see exactly where that political border sort of pops in. I do think some of those examples in particular, when it's so vivid like that, are very helpful to make some of those points.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was paying a little bit of attention to the talks, so I have to kind of bring myself out of it to make sure everything that people can hear and important things like that. One that I enjoyed a lot was Jonathan Newman's. He gave one called "How We End the Fed," I think, or "How to End the Fed," essentially. And I like that, because so often I think we're framed as sort of these naive, pie in the sky thinkers that want these impossible goals. And maybe people will concede that if we didn't have a Fed, that's great. That would be great. But how do we actually get there? And so he gave in just 20 minutes. A talk just walking through no, what are some action steps that we could actually take if Rothbardians took control? What would they actually do? And that's helpful for us to be able to talk through with people. So that was a good one. And then I also liked Dr. Nanjoya's talk on civil rights, and kind of looking back at some early Southern literature that was in fact sounded a whole lot like what MLK basically used. The same language that he used in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech was found in what was it, the Charleston Observer or something? Basically, doing what she always does and just kind of shattering the mythology around a lot of those topics that are they're built up and that are very helpful to the progressive cause. And so I'm just always a big fan of her lectures too.
Yes, always a highlight. I always do very well on YouTube afterwards. As well. Jonathan's lecture was great. I also like that he kind of threw in some kind of reforms at the end. Again, hate to be just a Pollock fanboy, but he was up in D.C. a couple weeks ago at the House Financial Services Committee talking about Fed reform, and so he kind of added some of his suggestions there, which I thought was a nice little addition too. Of course, it's interesting that the people that are there. We had a gentleman that works in financial services that came here from Australia, and it was his first time at a Mises event. He lived right down the road there from Delray, and he talked about how like one of the many COVID refugees that we've had come through our orbit. But how like the first year in Australia, like it was actually okay. Like they didn't have a lot of travel outside the island, and so like it was like, oh, you can go to places that usually tourists just sort of creep your man down. And then how quickly that went away as soon as you started having outbreaks there, and how glad he was to be in Florida for the rest of that time, which I can certainly appreciate there. But like the amount of people within like the financial services committee, or they're not committee, but like the financial services industry. A lot of fun conversations about the Middle Ages. Was I know Ryan McMaken, if he was here, he would be talking a lot about the rise of the tax state. Another fun topic. But it was always fun to see how many people want to talk about the Middle Ages at an event like this. You normally don't get a lot of that sort of discussion anywhere else, from my experience. Any other standout experiences from talking with folks?
Well, I did enjoy the brief panel between Ryan, Bill Anderson, and Peter Klein on kind of the 30th anniversary of Mises.org, since that's kind of what I work doing, is helping edit the pieces on there. But it was just nice to hear from kind of all of them. With Dr. Klein had kind of started the original format of the website, and then gathering articles and pieces on there, which really I guess wasn't done in that same way. And then Ryan also had just some good insights of just what the site is for and what it's about, and he kind of took the time to contrast so much is being done with AI, and there's potential for AI and lots of things, but that our content is free, that it's on message, and it's not, and it's human written. I mean, it's not, we're not going to have a bunch of just AI sites writing, and and I actually have bots online now that people are commenting back and forth with, who are AI, and now at a certain point it'll be bots commenting against bots. But anyway, and then hearing from Bill, he's been kind of in and out with Mises. So he said that he only worked there since 2022 or 23, something like that. But he's been active with Mises.org a lot longer than that, and so anyway, it was nice to hear his experience. And so he said that was very influential for him. Also, just in kind of building his writing and building his career. He was a journalism major and an economics professor, and was getting his PhD, which he eventually did at Auburn. But the Mises.org and the writing regularly and getting paid, he was key, like supplemental income, but also was just instrumental in his career. So anyway, now he's I don't know if I want to use it's an appropriate term, a gatekeeper of what goes on to Mises, and cares about what fits with the page. And so anyway, it was kind of fun just to hear from them some stuff I kind of knew about the history of the page, and then just thinking back to my job and potentially your guys' jobs, depending on all that you do. May not have been possible 30 years ago, just all that has changed. Now, 30 years ago, I was 2, but, still like,
we would have been sending out,
we
had been sending out episodes of Power and Market via cassette tape back in those days.
Right. Yeah. Or we'd have a radio show, I guess. But it's so really things have changed to facilitate, and make possible new jobs. And there's something there, a lesson there about the division of labor and how markets grow and develop, and not everybody became unemployed when there were new technologies and new jobs, and we didn't all we didn't need a universal basic income, and
Yeah, I also enjoyed, especially that part of the Peter's part of the panel when he showed pictures of like the early Mises.org and told the story of how the site actually started, which I had never heard before. So I enjoyed that a lot. I also enjoyed the keynote address from James Bovard as well. Was a good time, and I think it was it during the introduction when Sandy Klein like introduced him by reading out all of the government officials who have denounced him.
Yes.
And it's like the Postmaster General and like all these random things, and people were applauding. That was a good way to start a speech, and it was a good time.
Yeah, Bovard's always a good time. I'm upset I did not have a cigar with him as I did last time he'd come to Auburn, but always the next time. Always next time. Yeah, but the Mises.org thing I think is really interesting because like being in this orbit, like often like one of the big surprising things like, oh well, you actually have more than just a website. Like that's just how big influential like Mises.org has been with the brand. Understandably so, with like just all the books and things like that. But it's often it's like, oh man, like particularly when they come to Auburn, it's like, oh man, like this is such an incredible building, it's such an incredible campus. Like I thought you guys were just a website, but like no, we are much more. Well, and how did you guys first discover Mises.org actually?
Oh, sorry, that's what I actually was thinking of as you were saying that. Through Ron Paul in 2012, some guys at college had told me about Ron Paul, and I was like, okay, so he's not a Democrat, not a leftist, but not a traditional Republican. Okay, I kind of like what he's saying. And then I had gone through college, hadn't heard more about him really since 2012, and was being challenged at college as a political science major, and kind of conservative, and which was good for me. But then I kind of found, a lot of the conservative movement, when I try to read their books and things, now there's more to it than I probably realized. There's Russell Kirk's and things like that. But I was like the kind of contemporary conservatives, if I try to read their books, they don't have a lot of research. They don't have a lot of footnotes. And then the left has a lot of the, academe. So I kind of tried looking up on YouTube. Well, let's see if there's any like adjacent, Ron Paul type of people. And I found, I think, Tom Woods, the Tom Woods Show. And then I found Mises.org. And at that time, I was trying to just gather resources on economics, politics, philosophy, just different things, knowing, I wanted to be a teacher. And I realized that Mises.org had all these books that were rigorous, that had footnotes, that had details, and they were free. And I was like, oh my gosh, who knows how long this is going to be there? I didn't know it had been there that long. And so I started downloading and actually saving all the books. So that was back in 2015 or so. And then, given the circumstances a decade later, I'm actually working at the Mises Institute. So it's, kind of cool to see, what takes place after 10 years of time. But yeah, so if it wasn't for Mises.org and the resources there, I wouldn't have, and the videos that are put out by Mises as well, lectures and different things, I wouldn't have discovered Mises, and then obviously wouldn't have been working for Mises as well.
It's a similar story.
Yeah,
a similar story for me. I was a geology major in college. So all my reading about economics was on the side, and I got very obsessed with it my freshman year, which was, I started in 2015, fall of 2015. I decided I had to, figure out what my political views were before the 2016 election, because it was the first time I was going to be voting. So I started really diving into it, and I pretty quickly got converted to the free market, converted by free market ideas, got very interested in that. And then as I sort of progressed through college, I was looking for books on, economics, especially. I was economics first. I kind of found the political stuff later. And, being a college student, I couldn't just buy every book I wanted to, or that I encountered. And as I was looking around for books, like the Mises was the one place that had the free PDF version of all these things. And so, of course, I think because that was available, it walked me from just sort of a general free market perspective kind of down the Rothbardian rabbit hole, which is, and of course, now I've landed here. But that's a large reason that I have so much appreciation for the donors that we were interacting with last week, because I think that's just so powerful. The fact that we put these books out for free, try to lower the costs for the people that might be kind of curious about these ideas. I think that's certainly something that sets us apart. And biased by my own experience, I think it's an incredibly effective approach.
Also, the fact that it's a platform for people to, out there in the wilderness that are consuming these ideas to be able to publish stuff on. Because I remember I first came across Mises.org probably 2011-ish. No, probably 2010, I think. Which was kind of a interesting area. Post. So it was continuing of the Ron Paul revolution at the time, obviously after a financial crisis and all that sort of fun stuff. Very, very big time for Osh and Econ. And then for a little bit, like what was really interesting at the time, I don't know, it was probably a little bit before you, Connor, but Josh, I don't know how much time you spent on kind of the econ blogs. Like
not a ton. No.
Oh, it's fascinating because like within this space, right? So much of the good work. So much of the real gems were econ blogs. The Mises Daily at the time was a big part of that. But it was like in the comments section, and you could see like you had a lot more engagement of like a professor on professor violence. Like particularly like something Betke and Horowitz had. I think Coordination Problem was their blog. And like you go back there now, like these articles are like 12 years old, but like you just see like the back and forth of like who kind of had the sharpened knife to kind of go after others. Like some I've got stronger opinions on than others. I'm gonna leave that out of this episode. But like, there's so much good material. Like what we need is someone who is interested in the contemporary history of economic thought, with Austrian and otherwise. Just comb through the comment section of the blogs back in the day. But for a little bit, the reason why a lot of those blogs kind of faded off is because they were so dependent upon academics. Like it was a blog by like 2 or 3 academics and whatever, and really a lot of the big ones, like even ones kind of outside of our orbit, like Bleeding Heart Libertarians was like a big libertarian blog back in the day, and I think it's largely defunct, or at least not what it used to be. And there's a variety of others kind of fit that approach. There's actually a period of time where the Institute kind of rebooted. The front page was Circle Bastiat, I think, was kind of like an academic focused blog, and we end up reverting back to the model that we now know and love today. But like Mises, Mises.org is, I think, one of the few econ blogs that were big in that era that are still, pretty high traffic website today. And I think a big part of that is precisely because it's not simply within the gatekeep of scholars per se, that we love our scholars, particularly when they publish on Mises.org. But like it's precisely the fact that it provides opportunities for others, people with different skill sets. Like I love getting a money and banking article from someone who is a trader, is with a D, not a T. But who are active, got real skin in the game, who are moving markets, if you will. Always my best insight out there, and you can't get that if you have a very narrow sort of academic gatekeeping device.
Right. It's about the ideas, not the credentials necessarily, which is also, it also makes it a great place to get your start if you're like a college student too. We accept a lot of articles from them. It's just, if it's good writing and, the arguments are sound, then it seems that we run down. I don't know, I'm not in the editorial side of it, but that seems to be kind of the vision of the site.
I joke with Bill a little bit that before, when I sent my first pieces and I sent them into Ryan McMaken and Daniel Labassi, so I didn't know Bill, and then I hadn't done one in a while. So I would send him, when I get this article from this guy, Bill, but I didn't know Bill. And so I was kind of like, I don't know who this is. It's kind of funny. We work together now. But sometimes I would get, on a tear, I'd write, be writing one. I'm like, okay, that was a good one. I have momentum. Let me write another one. I'd write 2 a week, and Bill would have to give me okay, let's pump the brakes. And so I joke that, like, well, in order to get to publish, as much as I wanted, I had to get hired and work at the Mises Institute, to get Bill to accept all of them. But so anyway, but I don't do 2 a week. No, that would be that'd probably be too much.
Yeah,
but
they've contained you to 1 a week.
Yeah, 1 a week. But yeah, no, it is great to be able to take in and kind of people we keep track of on our spreadsheet when we take in articles of people who, do they have a profile yet, meaning they've written for us before and they're known to us, or are they new to us? So it's always nice to see somebody from like Mises U or some other conference or something that, or maybe it's just an unknown person to us that will send us something and then kind of see even the growth process of, okay, this is their first article, and whatever level that they're at, it has to be obviously accepted by us for going on the site, but then also kind of see them get into a groove and over time even turn in some regular stuff, and then there are people who've become kind of some of our regular writers that we kind of expect to see something from a couple times a month. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that process of, and it gives people, just practice writing, not for a grade, not for something that's you are trying to get it accepted, but you're not trying to achieve a grade. You're actually trying to think and articulate thoughts, which I think is going to be even more important given the rise of AI and other things. No, it's actually, our writers should actually be proud that they're the ones putting together their thoughts and explaining and thinking through things. So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of a fun process to see.
Well, anything? I know we were announcing our big event lineup next year. We got a lot of things going on. But before we get to the end of the year, Connor, you're going to be up in Grand Rapids starting next month, November 1st.
Yeah, November 1st. Yeah, we're putting on an event basically about how the economy, the current economic system, is just screwing over Gen Z, and it should be fun. It's a little different than what we've done before. We do a lot of these circles, these events where we kind of go on the road and bring a few scholars to give some talks, and it's open to the general public, but this is specifically for students at Cornerstone and surrounding universities. So kind of blending that like public kind of on the road event with our student programs. That's sort of the vision of this, and this is our first trial run. And yeah, I'll be speaking there and working on my talk now. I'm talking essentially about the title of my talk is something to the effect of rejecting the siren call of right-wing progressivism, is what I'm calling it. And I think there's a lot of, you could kind of, they're sort of the right-wingers, or they brand themselves as right-wingers, who are really pushing for more government intervention and on various fronts. And I really view that as, at the end of the day, they completely accept the progressive narrative of economic history, what I call the New York Times view of economic history. And so I think that it really, at the end of the day, is a historical narrative battle on that front. And I think I see some of those ideas getting popular with young people, understandably. I think that a lot of it is a branding thing. The status quo has been branded as free market capitalism, free trade, various stuff, and that's not true. So that's a little bit what I'm going to be trying to speak to in my talk. But yeah, very excited.
Excellent. Josh, you're going to be at the Austrian Economics Research Conference next year?
Yes. Yeah, I'm planning to be there. All things being equal, I need to
presenting anything? Got any papers in the works?
Some papers. I have one in that I've written some articles that are adjacent to, as kind of it's helping me research a little bit. Really about disproving chartalism in colonial America. And it's really easy. I mean, so that modern monetary theory, MMT, has this idea that that government chose money, and by its declaration, money became money, and that's where it came from. And they say all these things about, well, all these people make up this fantasized story about barter leading to a medium of exchange that becomes money. And so they say that, but then they usually look back to examples in, 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia to try to use vague things to try to prove that that money was a product of the state, not of the free market. Which is then convenient because then the money can, be shaped to be whatever the state says it is. The problem with that is MMT's favorite example of where they think modern monetary theory would work is the United States. And so I have kind of a simple task. It's almost, I guess, not fair, but I do think it's worth looking into, of saying, well, the United States isn't that old, and we are we're a literate culture with with writing.
Used to be, at least.
And at least we're that's declining, but we have documentation of goods being exchanged on a barter economy, and then becoming generally accepted media of exchange, and then becoming money. And so you have things like shells, nails, tobacco, gold, and silver, and even I've just found in just an encyclopedia about colonial monetary history, which probably doesn't get read by that many people, but I'm into it right now. Even just our English word currency in America, I found a book that says currency, we come to think of it as the money that we use, but currency meant whatever was current, used and accepted in trade. So it didn't actually mean money. The very word currency, which came to be synonymous with money, actually meant whatever goods were acceptable in trade. And so just the existence of things like that give evidence that money emerged on the free market. So anyway, I'm trying to I'll be over the next few months trying to put together the paper on that. And if we have the Libertarian Scholars Conference, Connor and I floated the idea of maybe co-authoring a paper, if we can work it out, depending on our timing, of called it's more the concept of the government monopolizes something and then does nothing and lets chaos come in. So some people call that anarcho-tyranny, but that kind of gives a bad name to anarcho. And so my working title that I called it was interventionist non-interventionism, meaning the government takes over something and then lets chaos reign, and then either blames the free market to regulate more, and or just lets the situation continue to devolve. So you get all the worst aspects of government tyranny, but then you also get it doesn't even manage the services that we're taxed for it to provide to us.
Well, we brought up an example earlier with the forest management.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
There, the fact that the private lands, like, they don't want. I mean, a lot of times they do want controlled burns, so it's not that they don't want fire, but they don't want these out of control infernos, and so they actually manage the land, but then government doesn't, and so then they are turned into these tinderboxes, and then they explode into these huge wildfires that take out entire towns, and it's like. I guess from our perspective, like, that feels like the government kind of doing something, even though they're not really doing something. And we're most interested in trying to work that into Rothbard's, his 3 types of interventions. Where does it fit in there? It's a little bit different. Is it a combination, or is it kind of its own thing? That's kind of what we're going to try to figure out.
And similar government policy led to cities being caught on fire. So
Yeah.
a lot of fire involved. Dealing with failed government services.
Right.
Yeah, but we talked about it with, like, the DC stuff, essentially. Taking over the police departments and then just letting crime happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, lots of examples of it's actually kind of be fun to get more thinking on that, because once you kind of have that category, you're like, oh yeah, they do that with a lot of stuff. Even you could even think of just potholes on the roads, where it's like, well, they tax you, you pay for the roads, and then they don't maintain it. That's not quite the same, but it's all over the place. So it's one of those things, I feel like once you see it, it's hard to unsee it.
Excellent. Anything else on the media, Connor, that you got cooking? After your
I'm not
your
sure
premiere?
about paper. So I presented a paper that I have not finished last year about making a specific argument that I hadn't really seen anybody else lay out, that when we talk about how terrible the media is, that it really only is damaging to people because of the political system. And so I laid that out. I gave a talk that used a lot of that argument during Mises U. So that's up on YouTube if anybody's interested. But Nothing specific in the works there in terms of another presentation, but who knows?
Yeah. And if you're a regular Mises Institute podcast listener and you want to, you have the ambition to write an academic paper, even if you're not in academia, a great place to present such work and ideas are at our two research conferences, LSC and AERC. And then we also announced the Rothbard University, which is going to be happening in May, I believe, in beautiful Auburn. So if you've always wanted to do Mises University, but you're no longer a student, also take a look at that. So before we get out of here, guys, you guys reading anything interesting? Austrian, non-Austrian,
For me,
something
go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Something non-Austrian I'm reading right now is I'm actually listening to it. Is a book about the Soviet space program called "The Wrong Stuff," and it's crazy. Like I didn't know too much about the history there, but it was just a complete and total mess. The book is written in a way where it is quite funny. It's a good writer, John Strasbourg or something like that. It should be easy to find if you type in "The Wrong Stuff." I just don't remember his name, but it's also I think, from my perspective, somebody that's studied the history of the right in a lot of ways. It's just interesting how the Soviet space program was a complete mess, basically the entire time. It was all political. Their entire motivation was this propaganda war with the Americans. They were completely hiding all the failed tests. And even the launch of Sputnik it was just a complete mess. So their successes were also basically miraculous successes. And it's just interesting reading that and realizing that essentially all the Cold Warriors on our side, on the American side, were working with the propagandists on the Soviet side to act like they were this huge threat when they did not have the rocket technology to get to the United States. That's why they had to send rockets to Cuba, because that was the only chance they had. And little things like they didn't use titanium, so their rockets were incredibly heavy. And talk about the calculation problem. It was a total mess. So it's an entertaining listen, especially the audiobook is quite good, but that's what I've been listening to on my commutes.
I hope you're going to tell us that Sputnik never happened. I'll become a Sputnik truther. That was also filmed on
an interesting fact there. People talk about how you could go out and watch Sputnik going overhead, but the thing was the size of a basketball or something. So nobody saw Sputnik. But what the Russians did is they painted they used a chrome paint on the second stage rocket. So that's what people were actually seeing there, because they wanted the Americans to be able to go outside and actually see what was going overhead. And of course they had Sputnik beeping so that people could pick it up on the radio. That's essentially all it could do, was beep. And they had to paint the rocket so people could see something, because they could only get this tiny little basketball sized thing up there.
How about you, Josh? In between colonial monetary history, what other page turners you got going on?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm revisiting a book that I've read quite some time ago, but needed a little more attention. I actually had it here. It was the Myth of the Robber Barons by Burton Folsom. And if he's not an Austrian, he's very close. He's been mentioned several times. Tom Woods has done presentations on him. Patrick Newman, Tom DiLorenzo mentioned, probably is where I heard of this book from, in How Capitalism Saved America. But it's a very good history of the so-called robber barons, and it's really more of a setting the record straight and a celebratory history of true entrepreneurs. And Folsom makes a distinction between market entrepreneurs who actually used economic calculations, sought profit, and became productive and efficient to serve the consumers really well and were rewarded because of it, and market entrepreneurs who used lobbying through the government to gain subsidies, to gain regulations, to gain other things in order to enrich themselves at the expense of the public rather than serving them. So I'm planning on, we'll see how this pans out, but maybe doing a couple of articles. I looked on Mises.org and I said, well, surely someone has done an article on James J. Hill, who created He was the only transcontinental railroad to never go bankrupt and not take a penny of government money. And all the subsidized railroads took government money. They were paid by the mile, so that you can imagine the incentives that being paid by the mile of track you lay creates. And they were all inefficient and bankrupt, even with the government help, and also bringing in the army to go to war with the Indians, which is where a lot of the Western violence between the settlers and the Indians comes from, is actually the army. And Hill didn't do any of that. He had a successful railroad, built a little bit more slowly, and never went bankrupt, was cheaper, was more efficient, negotiated with tribes peacefully, Indian tribes. And so anyway, it's important because, as Connor mentioned, kind of the issues of media and branding is the progressive era has basically framed the debate and discussion for over a century, so that even when you have people who are friendly to the free market, they still work within a progressive paradigm where they say, well, there's the free market and then there's socialism. Let's meet somewhere in the middle, which, as Mises said, the middle of the road leads to socialism. Because, there were the robber barons. There were these people that were monopolizing through the free market and these things, which just is not true. So I think it's important to continue to set the record straight. Even if we're preaching to the choir is often the ones that need to hear it. That no, it's you can be unashamed of the free market and enter that kind of discussion with confidence to say, no, I'm not embarrassed to say I don't want 70% free market. I want 100% free market, and you should too.
Yeah, our crusade will not end until we remove Upton Sinclair's The Jungle from every middle school reading list.
And that's what I wrote
Josh
on
and I were
last
talking
week
about
a little bit, was that it's fiction. It even influences us. Nobody, I don't, people say that they've read The Jungle. I've never read it, but people will say that they, but it for good or bad, it has influenced their thinking, even though it's totally fictional.
Well, I've been reading Martin Van Buren, The First Politician, by James Bradley. Very thorough. It's interesting that not many Van Buren biographies out there of any substance. So this came out like last year. So it's hot off the presses, but it's been pretty good.
That reminds me, too. I'm about halfway, I think, through Burr by Gore Vidal, which you recommended, though, and it's wonderful. I was not really expecting it. And Gore Vidal
doesn't lie to you.
I wasn't expecting it before you recommended it. To be fair, it's a very Rothbardian view of that time period, and because it's not that. I guess I was a little worried. Gore Vidal is framed as this far left kind of lunatic. I was sort of expecting kind of a Howard Zinn, like, let's just tear down the founding fathers because that's what we're going to do, and like not a lot of nuance,
slavery,
stuff like that. But no, it's like actually like very smart revisionism that I think is very based in reality and is very Rothbardian, and it's a fun book and a fun way to sort of explore that time period through fiction.
Yeah, no, big fan of Vidal's work. I think what was his name? Almost had it, but we have a great article, very very extensive article on like the revisionism of Gore Vidal on Mises.org. If anyone is Jeff Rickenbach, the voice of many a Mises audiobook, but he has a very interesting article on Burr and his particular brand of revisionism. Then the other book,
Gore Vidal, you mean?
Yeah, on Gore Vidal.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
His brand of revisionism, which was good. The other one, which is a little bit different, is the Why is Everything, which is about the Kyle Shanahan football coaching tree. Well, the Mike Shanahan coaching tree. So if you're interested in entrepreneurship applied to sports, Mike Silver, very good narrator there on that. So for our football fans, which I know, not always a direct overlap based off of how some of my football-related Mises.org articles have performed, but and there's a few out there. There's a few. But and with that being said, again, a little bit different power and market this week as we get back to the swing of things.
We'll read up on the news for next week.
Yeah.
We've been kind of off the grid.
A little bit. So next week, I expect Ryan will be back with us. So no Josh next week, probably. We'll see. I was surprised. You never know what you're going to do when you click on Power and Market. So for Joshua Mawhorter, for Connor O'Keefe, this has been Tho Bishop. Thank you for listening. Proceed ever more boldly. Okay.